Hey, good morning all. My name is Kevin. It's my first video that I'm going to post. What we're doing today is diagnose an exhaust oil burn. So we've got blue smoke coming out the exhaust upon startup and during idling. Okay, this is my daughter's 2009 Jeep JKU. It's got the 3.8 liter overhead valve, and the engine was rebuilt about 6,000 or 7,000 miles ago by me. So unfortunately this is going to be a cut and paste video because I don't know how to do any kind of, well, editing yet. So like I said, I'm getting ready to redo this head gasket on the driver's side, but to get to it you got to pull a bunch of stuff out. So what I've done so far is I have removed the PCV valve. I have removed the hose for the bank one valve cover that goes into the intake, and I am presently removing all of the spark plug wires. All through here, pull all the spark plug wires off. I'm just removing it as one piece. The coil, one bolt here, one bolt down there, these two bolts, and the whole thing comes off as just one big piece. And I'm going to pull this hose off from here, the PCV hose back here. It's easier to get to when the actual coil pack is off. I hope you can see that. And just remove the clip that's holding in the wiring harness into the coil pack right. Hell, you can't see it, but it's right there. Just pop that off and then everything's loose. Okay, what we're looking at is the driver's side just behind the alternator. So with the coil pack out and all the wires, we're opening it up a little bit. Now you can see a little bit better. Now we're going to remove the PCV. I don't see how these guys do it without looking stupid. But this PCV hose here, squeeze it, pull it up, get it out of the way. You're gonna pop off the hose. Ratchet with a pry bar, loosen it up, pull the serpentine belt off. Remove your bolts and your wires, and then you can take off your coil mount. Holy crap, I don't know how they do this on YouTube. But yeah. Okay, alternator's coming out. Remove the bracket up top, one bolt here, one bolt that was being held on over here with the coil mount. All right, this was 12 inch, that was 13 millimeter half inch. These down here are 16 mils, one right here, one right here. They both pull out. 1, 2, your bracket's been removed, your wires have been removed. Alternator should come right out. There we go. Keep your bolts together. All right, now we're looking at valve cover, but still got to get all kinds of crap going before we can get to it. So the upper radiator hose is going to have to come out, so watch out for coolant. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the hose off the thermostat housing, and I'm going to tie it up somewhere so it's higher than the water level so it won't come out. Once that's done, then probably going to go ahead and release the exhaust manifolds. They should come out pretty easily because, well, I just installed them a couple thousand miles ago. And I'm going to pull off the EGR cap up here, remove the MAF sensor wiring, and the vacuum line. Also, I'm going to remove the fuel line to get all that stuff out of the way. All right. The PCV, the EGR line is held in by two 8mm screws. And then the same thing, if you can see down there, that line right here goes down to two 8mm screws that I've already started backing out. Okay. This is just a clip, and once the clip is released, you pull it apart. But remember, this is this fuel line is under pressure, so you might get a little spurt of fuel coming out. Not a big deal, just, you know, be ready for it. You can throw a little rag down there or just let it run like I do. Don't do what I do, I guess. Also, down here under the throttle body is the throttle body connection. You're going to take that off as well. Okay, something I wanted to address with removing the fuel line for this Jeep and most others is it's got a press and release fitting right there and back there. So it's kind of like a shark bite with internal press and release, except instead of an external. So my dumbass couldn't find my disconnect tools, so I had to run out to Advanced Auto, or it's the part number there, and grab a tool for it. So the way this works is that you slide this tool, this plastic tool, over the male end of the fitting, and you push inwards towards the female, and that disconnects the wire. This would probably be the only specialty tool that you would need for this this fix. So to use this tool, you wrap it around the male end of the fitting. You push it in there, you squeeze it together, and then it releases when it freaking wants to. It's a bit of a process. You push in and pull out. But I'm gonna have to do this off camera. I can't hold and do it at the same time. All right, there we go. So I had to use two hands to do it. You push this thing in over this little lip, or till it touches this lip here on the inside, and it releases this piece. You take a look, the little plastic lip here that you see. See if I can focus here. This little plastic lip here pushes on these pins there and releases the hose connection. And that's it. Just kind of move it out of the way and you're good to go. I'm not going to remove the whole thing because I'm working on the number 2 bank. By the way, the reason why I know it's the number 2 bank is because I used a sea snake, pulled out the spark plugs. When I pulled out the spark plugs, I looked inside with a sea snake and it was gnarly and oily on the piston heads on that bank, on the driver's bank, and it was clean on the passenger side bank. So the driver's side bank of cylinders is where we're having the issue. All right, on to the next thing. removal of the EGR line. 2/8 up top, 2/8 on the back, and I'm going to pull off the connector to the map sensor. All right, there's actually a hose in the back here. I'll probably bust that as well. All right, all the bolts are loose. Actually removed, technically. Now it's as simple as just lifting off the top plenum, grabbing the hose back here, and getting the damn thing off. Here we go. Now, you got to be careful, because now that you're taking off the plenum, there are gaskets, rubber gaskets underneath that you don't want falling down into the intake. These gaskets here. So some of them stayed on, so we got to remove them and put them in. Upper intake plenum is off. And it goes into the pile. And now the work begins. Okay, now that we have figured out what's going on and we have to actually remove that cylinder head on a bank number 2 driver's side, we have got to do some cleaning out of this intake valley. All these wires are channeled through this valley going to the throttle body and all these different things here. We have, but we also have sensors here, like the temperature sensor, the cam sensor, and the crank sensor down here, all a part of this loom, as well as all of our injectors. Now, if memory serves me, taking this thing apart last time, you don't have to remove the injectors or the injector plenum, the injector rail, fuel rail. But you do have to get rid of this electrical wiring harness because, well, obviously it's sitting on top of what needs to be removed. So these have already been removed. As you can see, we have one sensor here, which looks like it's the thermostat sensor, temperature sensor. Down here by the crank, I'm sorry, the cam, that's probably your cam sensor. And then down here, when you follow this all the way down to the bottom, don't know if you can see it, but it's right above the engine mount. If you follow this wire all the way down, you're going to find another sensor, which I believe is your crank sensor. All those sensors, the couplings have to be removed, and that frees up this part of the loom. Then each one of these individual injectors also have to be pulled off, and then you can fold the whole harness back and just stuff it somewhere. But that's the next step. Okay, we're getting closer. So I've removed the entire wiring harness. Came off, had little clips here holding it in place. Popped them out. You can see the injectors. This plenum has got to come off. The injectors and the rail are bolted onto or connected to this lower plenum, intake plenum, as well as the thermostat. So all that comes off in one piece. Now you obviously have to pull the heater core hose off of the thermostat housing. And there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are, I believe, 8 bolts holding this intake plenum in place. You can sneak them out. They look like they're 13 millimeter and 10 millimeter respectively. I am 90% sure you don't have to pull the fuel rail and the injectors to get this whole thing out. But I will let you know in a second. All right, I've removed all the bolts that hold the lower intake plenum in place. And I removed the hose from the heater core. You have to actually take out all the bolts, if I remember correctly, because the way this thing is designed is it goes into the block in a V shape. So if the bolts are still sticking in there, it's not coming out. So pull all the bolts out and you can lift the entire lower intake plenum out. Yeah. Here we go. She ain't pretty, but she's okay. Put it someplace safe, and then we'll inspect. Okay, here we are. This is our V gasket for the lower intake. All right, it's held in by 2 bolts. I don't specifically think I'm going to remove it, although I probably will end up replacing it and I'll remove it later on, but it just helps stop any of the crap from getting in below it. We're going to go ahead and clean all this stuff out of the way just for time purposes. I went ahead and removed the exhaust manifold, or the header, by simply just pulling off the 6 bolts that hold it in place. Grab the exhaust manifold gasket and the 2 bolts that are holding it to the catalytic converters, or the down pipe on the exhaust. Next step now, as you can see, we're pretty much free and clear. So I'm going to pull off the valve cover, which is size 8 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. And then I'm going to go from there, start pulling off the head bolts. So we'll inspect what it looks like under the valve cover when it's done. Okay. All right. So let's see what we find. I unbolted all 8 number 8 millimeter bolts. And let's see what we got. It's nice and clean. Wasn't expecting anything major, but doesn't look too bad. That remains to be seen. Not a lot of sludge. So next thing we're going to do is pull the head, and that should be the end of it. Hopefully we can get our results and figure out what the heck is going on. All right, to pull the head, you just got to pull all the head bolts out. You know, you're going to see them down here. You're going to see up inside here. And I'll get back to you in a bit. Okay, and voila, head is out. So it's been about a week since I last videotaped this. Things have happened. Obviously, we went through Christmas, and Merry Christmas to everybody that was watching the channel. But come to find out, when I pulled this head off, there was obviously a systemic issue. That is the cylinders that I found when I pulled off the head. Okay. The reason why it looks like that is because when I purchased the remanufactured head from a very large remanufacturing company, they decided to not install valve seals. Not one valve seal came in this remanufactured head. So I called up the company and they sent me a brand new head. So since this head never had any valve seals in it, all the oil that was coming up into the head and getting pushed around that oiled all of this system here crept down through the valve guides and then down into the cylinders. And when a cylinder valve opened, it created oil burn. So that is what an engine head looks like after 7,000 miles of burning oil because of no valve seals. Anyway, I'm going to clean up this head and this block here. I'm going to put the new head on with all new parts, and I'm going to take that one off and tackle it as well. All right, stay tuned. Okay, so I've cleaned up the block and cleaned out the cylinders and honed them a bit. So cylinder head gaskets back on, and I'm getting ready to mount the new head. Okay. Next on the list was installing the head, which went down on a brand new head gasket after I'd cleaned and inspected everything. This is the new head that they gave me after the other ones didn't have any valve seals in them. So props to lowcostparts.com and Engine Tech. They were badass. I got a head that was, had a manufacturer's defect. They forgot to install the valve seals, and they sent me everything I needed to replace the head, including the head, practically next day. I had to wait on the head a couple days because it came from Texas, but they sent it out that day. Anyway, long story short, head has been installed. Let me show you what I did. I had to reinstall the plate that covers the EGR mount. Since these heads are usable on either side, there is a EGR mount, so if it was flipped the other direction, the EGR is in the back, right behind where that transmission dipstick is. So on this side, you plate it. All right, so that plate right there was installed with a gasket. The next thing was the head bolts, all 8 of them. That would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now remember, these things are critical for torquing to spec, because this head sits on top of a combustion chamber. That means explosions, that means fire, that means a lot of pressure inside those chambers. And if these bolts aren't installed correctly, you can easily blow a head gasket or worse. So I'll go through what the head bolt torque specs are for you for this engine. This is the 3.8 liter Chrysler. So first torque is to 45 pounds each, all the way, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4. So the 4 middle ones first, okay? Then 5, 6, then all the way in the back, 7, 8. They all go to 45 pounds. Then you torque them in the exact same sequence to 65 pounds. Once you have them all torqued to 65 pounds, then you're going to go back and recheck your torque to 65 pounds. That is step 3. Once that is done, then you do 1/4 of a turn. So 90 degrees, which is 1/4. You take a breaker bar and you tighten them 1/4 of a turn in sequence. And that should end up, once you re-torque them or you retest them with your torque ratchet, it should be 90 pounds or greater. If you do not have 90 pounds or greater when you torque them that last quarter turn, then you have to replace the bolts. Remember, these bolts stretch. So when they stretch, some bolts don't do as well as others. So make sure that they're torqued correctly. And if a bolt didn't make it to 90 pounds because it stretched too easily, replace that bolt, okay? You cannot reuse head bolts in this engine unless they're like APRs, and I couldn't find them. I tried so hard to find actual APR studs for this engine, and I came up short. I'm not saying they don't exist, is I couldn't figure out how to order them, and since it's over the holidays, you know, I couldn't get a hold of anybody from that manufacturer. Anyway, long story short, I used Felpro. Felpro has always done well for me, whether you like it or not. That was what was available for me. Anyway, when you tighten and torque these things, you will feel them stretch. Okay, so you cannot reuse them again. Anyway, so next thing in line, I installed the pins or the rods, and now I'm going to put on the rockers. Okay, I'm going to lay them down on top. I'm going to put the screws in, and then I'm going to torque those to spec. All right, so rocker arms are in. You want to make sure that when you put your push rods in, that they line up properly with the cup on the rocker, and the rocker lines up with the spring itself. Okay, when you pull the lower intake and open up and expose the valley, you will see that all of the rockers are sitting on top of the lifters. All the push rods are sitting on top of the lifters. Just verify that before you lock everything down. All right, all you did was pull up your lower intake manifold steel gasket. I'm going to put it back so I don't drop anything down into the actual engine itself. So also something to keep track of is that when you put your push rods in, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there are 2 holes in each head. One is for oiling and the other one is the hole for the push rod. On all of the heads, it's the top or the one closest to the center that it goes through. Okay, to remember that. And when you tighten the entire thing down, you're going to be torquing it to approximately 20 foot-pounds. Now that completes the installation of the head on this side. I'm going to put the valve cover back on, clean it up, put it back on with new valve cover gasket and new valve cover bolt seals. And I'm going to put my spark plugs in. I'm going to button up this side. Now, because I got the head on the other side at the same time as I got this one, I'm going to go ahead and tear that apart, pull it out, and make sure everything is okay with it. It didn't have anywhere near as much oil residue on top of the cylinders the pistons when I scoped it, but since I have a new head gasket anyways, and I have new torque bolts, I might as well just go and inspect it. So I'm expecting to find valve seals in there, but a nice cleanup and inspection I think would probably go a long way. And since I'm here anyways, I might as well do it. So I'm going to take care of this head. It's the exact same process as this head, and I'll get back to you when we start buttoning everything back up. All right, second head is going back in. It was in pretty good condition. Had a little carbon buildup, but from what I can gather, these 3.8s, they do a lot of dumping PCV oil into the cylinders from the intake. That's why everybody recommends a catch can between the PCV and the intake, which I'm probably going to end up doing. But as you can see, there are valve seals in there, and it's in pretty good condition. That's just cleaned up, ready to go back in. It looks like it's in decent condition, so I'm happy with it. So, stabbing this thing back together. You know, something I want to mention, which is a tech tip that I learned from somebody quite a while ago, is if you want to double check and make sure that your aluminum or steel head is not warped, the easy way and the quick way, obviously it's not perfect, but it's better than what it was, or what it could be, is if you buy one of these industrial precision rulers that are made out of stainless steel. This one is a Westcott with a model number of 10417. You put it against your head and you run it down the head, and if you can see light between the head and anywhere on the ruler, then you have a warped head. I only have one hand, but I would use two hands on both sides, or one hand on both sides to do it. But I just did it a couple seconds ago just to verify that the head was straight, and the head's actually in good condition. But that's just a tech tip I learned from my dad a long time ago. Hope that helps. All right, now that I've overcome my emergency of dropping my 13mm socket down into the number 6 intake hole and retrieving it, I have installed the lower intake gasket, the metal gasket, bolted the two 10mm down there and down there with our TV, and then in a crisscross pattern I tightened all 10mm bolts that hold the actual lower intake manifold down to the block, tightened them to 35 foot-pounds. Okay, 35 foot-pounds is what the manufacturer says. So that's done. So our lower intake manifold is now secure and in place. And at this point in time, what we're going to be doing now is starting to reassemble our wiring harness. So we have 6 injectors. We have the EGR valve back there. And, well, that right there is the, what do you call it? The coil pack wire. So that comes in last. But at least we're going to put together our 6 injector plugs, and then we're going to install our fuel line, just basically the reverse of what we did. And once that's all installed and everything is put the way it's supposed to be, then we're going to clean and place our upper intake plenum down on top of the manifold. Okay, I'm going to do installation now. So I went ahead and installed the wiring harness here, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 injectors. I went ahead and installed the connector for my cam sensor, my temperature sensor, and all the way the hell down there, you'll see it, especially if you take off the inner fender, it's easy to get to, the crank sensor. So the only other sensors I have up front left are my map sensor that goes, or whatever the hell it's called, that goes into my intake hose. And then this is my throttle body. Everything else back here has now been installed. So as I did the last side, I went ahead and installed my spark plugs. I'm going to install my headers, or maybe in your case, exhaust manifold. I changed over the headers. They were pretty inexpensive because my daughter's Jeep had 6 cracks in the exhaust manifolds, which is a very common problem for these Jeeps. So I replaced them with stainless steel exhaust headers. Sounds a little bit nicer as well. And by the way, I reinstalled the fuel line. All you do is, hang on a second, let me see if I can pull this off real quick. This little clip is off. You take the the fuel connection, and you push it in this way into your rail until you hear a click. And all this little piece is just a security, well, it's your security blanket to make sure it doesn't unclick. So it goes right here, pops into place, and stops it from being removed. There's supposed to be one over here, but I don't know where that one went. Unfortunately, it never came with the vehicle. But it is popped in, it is in place, and it's not coming apart. So not too worried about it. So yep, right now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install my exhaust manifold right down to the downpipe there, and then I'll get back to you. All right. Everything has been installed. I had to do a couple little things that wasn't a part of this valve seal issue that I took care of on the side while I was off camera. But everything has been installed so far. Now we're ready to finally button up the engine, and we're going to install the upper intake plenum. Now the upper intake plenum here, first thing you do, because this is a failure point, is make sure there's no cracks in the seals. And I replaced the well, I guess they're kind of seals or O-rings around each intake. It's a little dirty in there. You can clean it out. I sprayed it out with a little bit of brake cleaner, but unfortunately there's not a whole lot I can do, but it'll burn itself off in a couple of 100 miles. Other than that, it's just try and drop it on there and make sure everything works as it should. Okay, intake manifold is on, but as you can see, they're not bolted down yet. I'm going to run these things down to, it's just under 10 pounds or 105 inch-pounds, but I don't have an inch-pound torque wrench, so I'm just going to snug it up and call it a day. Okay, now that I use the old German torque wrench good and tight, I gotta start putting some stuff back together here. So we've got a bunch of lines here. This is going to be a vacuum line, which runs here. This vacuum line runs to we got this, goes down to here. Lock that in place. This bad boy gets installed the right way around. Gets locked in place. One of the problems I had was this vacuum line here that you see I did a little modification to. This vacuum line here got burnt up and melted against the EGR exhaust tube that goes into the top of this manifold. So I cut the bad piece out and I resealed it with I don't know if it's called a shark bite, but it's a shark bite type connector. So it's 3/8 of an inch, and just pop that in place. Anyway, we've got the MAF sensor right there that we've got to install the connector to. Down here, I don't know if you can see it. Up there it is. There's a little vacuum hose that runs all the way to the brake booster that has to be installed. This is your intake from your PCV. Which comes from there. So there's your PCV intake there. PCV exhaust. So your PCV goes down into there and gets covered by a tube. This plug goes into your throttle body and your EGR, which is behind your right side of your engine, gets plumbed and it goes to your intake right there. So that's what I'm going to do now. Pause this at any time. I'm sure you guys understand how to do that. I've been doing that forever, so I can't be the only one that figured that out. Okay. MAF sensor's done. Hose from the brake booster is installed back there. EGR exhaust to the intake line. Is installed there. That's an absolute nightmare, especially if you have fender wells, inner fenders, which we do, but they're not installed right now. All right, now we're going to hook up our throttle body. All right, this last one is for the intake temperature sensor. We've got our vacuum hooked up, and we're going to go ahead and hook up our EGR now. I'm sorry, our PCV now. So with the PCV, to make sure it's working properly, because a PCV allows exhaust gases coming from your crankcase into your to discharge from your crankcase, so it doesn't build up too much pressure, and into the top of your intake. This is where we're going to put the oil catch can, because we get a lot of oil coming from from the PCV, which is very common for these engines, even though this engine's been rebuilt 7,000 miles ago, and it is in good condition with good compression and bleed down. Even with a bleed down test, we still get plenty of oil in there. But to check to see if your PCV is working, you shake it. If that little ball is moving okay, and you look inside it, and everything seems to be reasonably clean, and you're good to go. This slides inside the top of this valve cover right there. And then your hose is placed over it there. And move this out of the way here. And then secured into there with obviously your hose clamps. I apologize, I'm doing this holding an iPhone because I've never done this before, so I don't have all the cool equipment yet. If you guys are interested in me doing more, then let me know, and then I'll do some more with you. So basically that's going to go over there, and again we're going to use our hose clamps to clamp them in place. All right, I'm going to do that now. All right, good morning. Next day, it was just getting too dark to work, so last we're going to do today is just all the touch-up stuff. We're going to get the alternator back on properly, get the hoses hooked up, alternator mount, and clamping. Back there in the back is going to be our wires. We'll go through that. And then lastly, hooking up our hoses, serpentine belt, intake, and just kind of dressing up all the wiring and getting everything back together. So we're going to start by installing our alternator, which I just placed in place, put the 2 bolts through, and then this will mount to there. And once this is in, then I'm going to run the serpentine belt. All right, so bolts are in, and stabilizing bar are in for the alternator. I had to install the bracket for the coil pack because I forget the coil pack goes in first into these bolts before the stabilizing bar does. Stabilizing bar sits on top of these studs here, which also holds down the coil pack. Any which way, I added my my electrical connector back to the battery from the alternator, and I added the alternator connection there. The serpentine was just installed, and I am going to, here is the routing of the serpentine belt. Everything gets mounted except for the idler pulley. This sits up here when it's loose. When you go down to the adjustment pulley and you bend it or compress it so the tension has been taken off of this, once this is under compression, I just take the belt and just throw it down underneath this pulley here, and then let go of the tension on it, and it comes right back up. All right, Last two things outside of buttoning up wiring. We're going to reinstall our hose going into our thermostat housing, or actually technically coming out of the thermostat housing. We're going to install the heater core hose, and we're going to install our intake hose as well as the connection to that. And let's see, and we're going to install our coil pack as well as all of our wires, and I will show you where each wire goes. All right, stand by. Okay, so I have been busy. The only thing I have left to do now is just hook up the intake hose and its respective connector. And I just wanted to show you something that was super, super important. And this was a mistake I made when I rebuilt this engine. I never realized how hot your EGR tube gets. Essentially, it's a damn exhaust manifold. It gets super, super hot. And when I tore this thing down to work on the valve seals, I found a potential huge hazard. Number one, I was getting the evap leak, high volume evap leak, and this evap hose right here, if you take a look, has been spliced right there because it welded itself to this exhaust hose. It was melted against there because there was, well, I don't know how much this insulation helps, but it wasn't there. It had rubbed through or whatever. So that evap line right there was, you know, melted through and causing a real nasty code. But when I was tearing that thing apart and getting it fixed, I realized that my alternator charging positive was also melting against this friggin' EGR tube. That right there, this tube is grounded. Oh, sorry. This tube is grounded. This is grounded to the engine, which is grounded to the frame, which is grounded to the negative on the battery. I had a positive melting against a ground. And if it had melted through, I don't know what kind of damage it would have caused, because it's a dead short. And potentially it could catch fire, because guess what this is? That's the damn fuel line. So all of this area is super, super, super susceptible to some major issues. So what I ended up doing, and this is a tech tip from an asshole that fucked up, excuse the language, make sure you route all of your power lines and your vacuum lines far enough away from this exhaust tube that it doesn't melt it. And that's what I've spent the last hour doing. Don't know if you can see it, but that tube is completely free of exhaust line, of evap lines, heater core lines, and electrical lines. So there's at least a gap. The only thing it's touching is the transmission line, and I really don't care about that. But there's at least a 1 to 2 inch gap all the way along that hose, all the way down to the EGR, to keep it from touching. This right here also I'm going to move. I just realized that that was there, but same thing applies. All right, I am pretty much done. After I button this thing up, I'll fire it up and see what's going on. Cross my fingers, right? You know, I totally forgot to talk to you about the coil pack and where all these wires go. So Number one, you'll see it's numbered here. Number one in this engine is the passenger side forward cylinder. So this is the only weird one. Number one. So
rather than bore you to death,
to the passenger side.
I'm going to try and see if I can
forward
insert
cylinder.
a picture
that is your primary
of the firing order and where each wire goes
cylinder.
In respect to the engine.
Now the nice part about this is it's pretty easy from then on. So 2, 4, and 6 are... Anyway, I am going to go ahead and keep the connector off of the coil right there. And I'm going to roll this engine over a couple dozen times to see if I can get the heads oiled before I actually go to fire it up. Also, I'm going to top off the oil and top off the cooling system. Well, she's running and a little steamy, but that's to be expected. She's calming down. Steam's going away. She's running pretty smooth. Add a little bit of coolant. See if we can get rid of all the bubbling. Well, I guess only time will tell whether I did a good job or not. If you guys have any questions, you can always message me. I'm not a professional mechanic, but I stayed at the Holiday Inn Express. And I have been doing this for a little while. If you guys don't mind liking and or subscribing, let me know if I did a good job and if you want to see more, seeing as though this is my first time. Thank you all for watching.